It was 11:47 p.m. on a cold December evening when Victoria Sterling first realized that $10 billion couldn't buy her a single honest conversation. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Chicago penthouse, each drop catching the city lights like fallen stars. She stood there in her silk pajamas, holding a glass of wine she hadn't touched, watching the world sleep 40 floors below. Victoria Sterling wasn't supposed to exist. Not as she was now, anyway. At 38, she had inherited Sterling Global Industries from her late father, a man who'd built an empire on luxury hospitality, cutting-edge biotech, and the kind of old money connections that opened doors before you even knocked. The company's tentacles reached into every corner of the global economy, from five-star hotels in Dubai to pharmaceutical research labs in Switzerland. But inheritance wasn't the same as earning. She knew that. Everyone knew that. The original plan had been architecture. She'd wanted to design beautiful spaces where ordinary people could feel extraordinary, even if just for a moment. She'd sketched buildings that curved like music hotels that felt like homes, restaurants that brought strangers together over shared meals. Her college portfolio had been filled with dreams rendered in pencil and hope. Then her father died in a helicopter crash over the Swiss Alps, and dreams became responsibilities overnight. The boardroom had been her baptism by fire. 37 men in identical Navy suits watching her with barely concealed skepticism. They spoke in code about quarterly projections and market positions, their words a foreign language she'd had to learn while drowning. Arthur Whitman, her father's longtime COO, had been her lifeline, a British gentleman with silver hair and infinite patience who translated corporate speak into something resembling English. But even Arthur, loyal as he was, couldn't translate the isolation. Every conversation felt scripted. Every laugh sounded hollow. People agreed with her before she finished speaking, complimented her on decisions she'd barely made, treated her like a fragile ornament rather than a human being. The higher she climbed in the glass tower of her success, the thinner the air became. Tonight's ritual had started 6 months ago, born from a conversation she'd overheard in the ladies' room of the Union Club. Two women wives of board members gossiping over lipstick touch-ups. She's just a pretty face with daddy's checkbook. I heard she doesn't even read the reports, just signs whatever Arthur puts in front of her. Well, what would you expect? She went to art school, for God's sake. Their words had cut deeper than any boardroom challenge, not because they were cruel, but because part of her feared they might be true. That night she'd stood in her walk-in closet staring at rows of designer suits and handcrafted shoes and made a decision. She would find out who she really was when stripped of everything that defined her. She would discover what the world looked like from the bottom looking up. The clothes came from a thrift store on the South Side, carefully selected to transform her from heiress to nobody. A worn denim jacket with fraying cuffs, a faded green sweater that had seen better decades, jeans that were soft with age and honest wear. She'd practiced walking differently, talking differently, being someone else entirely. Tonight she was about to become Emma Walsh, a woman whose biggest concern was making next month's rent. Her destination was the Golden Griffin, the crown jewel of Sterling's restaurant empire. She'd acquired the chain through a hostile takeover 18 months ago, but she'd never actually eaten at one of their establishments. The Chicago location was supposed to be their flagship, a temple to American fine dining where senators dine next to software billionaires, where reservations were made months in advance. Arthur's reports painted it in glowing terms: exceptional service, impeccable quality, profit margins that made shareholders weep with joy. But reports were just numbers, and numbers couldn't tell her if the soul of the place matched its success. She wanted to see it through the eyes of someone who didn't matter, someone invisible. Victoria took one last look at herself in the hallway mirror. The transformation was complete. Gone was the polished executive who commanded rooms with a glance. In her place stood Emma Walsh, unremarkable and overlooked. She grabbed her worn leather purse, a careful prop containing exactly $47, some crumpled receipts, and a bus pass, and headed for the private elevator. As the doors closed and she descended from her tower, Victoria Sterling disappeared, and Emma Walsh was born. The city streets were different at this hour, quieter but somehow more alive. She walked 6 blocks to the restaurant, her breath visible in the cold air, feeling the strange freedom that came with anonymity. No security detail trailing behind, no driver waiting at the curb, no one watching her every move. For the first time in months, she was truly alone. The Golden Griffin rose before her like a fortress of warm light and brass fixtures. Through the tall windows, she could see the soft glow of table candles, the elegant dance of servers in black and white, the quiet theater of fine dining in motion. She pushed through the heavy wooden doors, leaving the cold night behind, and stepped into a world she owned but had never truly experienced. The hostess looked up from her reservation book, her smile practiced and professional. She was young, maybe 25, with the kind of polished beauty that suggested careful grooming and expensive dental work. Her eyes swept over Emma's thrift store ensemble with the efficiency of a security scanner. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" Victoria Emma now shook her head. "No, I was hoping you might have something available." The hostess's smile grew tighter, more strained. She glanced past Emma toward the dining room where soft conversations and gentle laughter created a symphony of contentment. Most tables were occupied by couples in evening wear, men in tailored suits, women whose jewelry caught the light like captured fire. "I'm terribly sorry, but we're completely booked this evening," the hostess said, though Victoria could see at least 3 empty tables from where she stood. "Are you sure even something small?" The hostess's fingers drummed against her podium, a nervous tell that Victoria recognized from countless business negotiations. "Well, we do have 1 table available, but it's not really. It's quite close to the kitchen, very noisy. I don't think you'd enjoy it." It was a gentle humiliation wrapped in false concern. The table reserved for people who didn't belong. "That would be perfect," Emma said, her voice steady. "I don't mind the noise." The hostess hesitated, clearly hoping Emma would take the hint and leave. When she didn't, resignation flickered across her features. "Very well, right this way." Victoria followed her through the dining room, acutely aware of the glances that followed their passage, curious looks from other diners, the quick assessment and dismissal. She felt like an actor who'd wandered onto the wrong stage wearing the wrong costume. The table was exactly as promised, tiny, wobbling, slightly tucked into an alcove near the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a server pushed through a wave of heat and noise, escaped the clatter of plates, the sharp calls of the line, cooks, the organized chaos of professional cooking. It was the worst seat in the house, and it was perfect. From here, she could observe everything: the careful choreography of service, the subtle hierarchies that played out between tables, the way staff treated different guests based on appearances and assumptions. She settled into her chair and opened the leather-bound menu, identical to ones she'd approved in board meetings but had never actually read. The prices made her wince, not because she couldn't afford them, but because she was seeing them through Emma's eyes now. A simple salad cost more than many people made in a day. "Good evening." Victoria looked up to find a server approaching her table. He was older than the hostess, maybe 40, with silver threads in his dark hair, and the kind of professional bearing that spoke of years in fine dining. His nameplate read Marcus. But there was something different about him. While the hostess had looked through Emma as if she were transparent, Marcus was looking at her, really looking, with the attention he might give any guest. "My name is Marcus, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" She ordered the house white wine, a modest choice that wouldn't raise eyebrows or strain Emma's budget. Marcus nodded without judgment, his manner warm and genuine. Excellent choice. I'll be right back with that. As he walked away, Victoria found herself studying his worn black shoes, the way his sleeve was carefully mended near the cuff. Like her own costume, his appearance told a story of someone making the best of what they had. She settled back in her chair, letting the noise from the kitchen wash over her like white noise. For the first time all day, she felt herself relax. Here in the worst seat in her own restaurant, disguised as someone who didn't matter, Victoria Sterling finally felt like she could breathe. But she had no idea that within the hour, her simple experiment in anonymity would uncover a conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything her father had built. And the quiet server with the mended sleeve and genuine smile was about to become the most important person in her world. Marcus returned with the wine, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd perfected his craft over decades. He poured exactly 4 ounces into her glass, the pale liquid catching the candlelight like liquid gold. "Have you had a chance to look over the menu?" he asked, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed genuine in a room full of performed pleasantries. Victoria Emma glanced down at the prices again, her stomach knotting. She was supposed to be someone counting every dollar, someone for whom this meal represented a significant splurge. Yet what would you recommend for someone who doesn't do this very often? Marcus smiled, and for a moment the practiced server facade slipped away. Honestly, the kitchen does beautiful things with simple ingredients. The roasted chicken is exceptional, locally sourced, perfectly seasoned. It's not the flashiest thing on the menu, but it's honest food. Honest food, the phrase caught her off guard. When was the last time she'd thought about food as honest or dishonest? That sounds perfect. As Marcus walked away with her order, Victoria noticed the manager emerge from behind the bar. She recognized him from corporate files, Richard Blackmore, a man who'd climbed the hospitality ladder through a combination of charm and calculated networking. He was handsome in a predatory way, with silver hair and the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He moved through the dining room like a shark through still water, stopping at tables to schmooze with guests he deemed important. She watched him laugh too loudly at a city council member's joke, compliment a real estate developer's wife on her dress, slip his business card to a tech mogul who looked uncomfortable with the attention. But when his eyes swept past Emma's table, they didn't pause. She was invisible to him, unworthy of his performance. The chicken, when it arrived, was indeed exceptional. Perfectly roasted skin that crackled under her fork, meat so tender it fell apart at the touch. The accompanying vegetables were simple but flawless: roasted carrots that tasted like they'd been pulled from the earth that morning, potatoes crispy outside and fluffy within. "How is everything?" Marcus asked during one of his check-ins. "Incredible," Emma said, and meant it. "This is some of the best food I've ever had." Something flickered across Marcus's face, surprise maybe, or gratitude. "I'm so glad you're enjoying it. Chef Rodriguez doesn't cut corners even when—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Even when what?" Marcus glanced around, then leaned slightly closer. "Nothing. I shouldn't have said anything." But he had said something, and Victoria's business instincts were suddenly alert. "You can trust me. I'm nobody important." He studied her face for a long moment, as if weighing whether this unremarkable woman in thrift store clothes could handle whatever burden he was carrying. "The food you're eating tonight, it's not what most of our guests get." Victoria's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" "Chef Rodriguez insisted on preparing your meal personally. He does that sometimes for guests he feels deserve better than—" Marcus stopped again, the professional mask sliding back into place. "I really shouldn't be telling you this." "Better than what?" Marcus looked toward the kitchen doors, then back at her. The weight of whatever he was carrying seemed to press down on his shoulders. "The meat that comes in the back door isn't the same as what's listed on our invoices. The fish that gets served to VIP tables comes from different suppliers than what everyone else gets. And the wine. He gestured toward her glass. What you're drinking is actually from our reserve stock. The house wine most people get is rot gut that gets marked up 400%. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Are you saying the restaurant is running some kind of scam? I'm saying that if you're not somebody Mr. Blackmore recognizes, if you don't matter in his world, you get the cheap stuff at premium prices, but you... He paused, studying her again. For some reason, Chef Rodriguez took one look at you and decided you deserved the real thing. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Her restaurant, her father's legacy, was systematically defrauding its customers. The Golden Griffin's reputation was built on a lie, serving substandard food to anyone deemed unworthy while pocketing the difference. How long has this been going on? Marcus glanced around nervously. I've worked here for 3 years. It was like this when I arrived. And you've never reported it? His laugh was bitter. To who Blackmore owns the local health inspectors. Half the city council eats here for free, and the corporate office... He shrugged. They only care about profit margins. Victoria felt sick. The corporate office was her. She was the one who'd praised Blackmore's performance, who'd approved his bonuses based on those fraudulent profit margins. Why are you telling me this? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Because you said the food was incredible and you meant it. Most people, when they get the real thing, they just expect it. They think they deserve it. But you appreciated it. That tells me something about who you are. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper folded tightly. There's something else you should know. Something bigger than just the food. He placed the paper next to her wine glass, his hand trembling slightly. I probably shouldn't give you this. If Blackmore finds out, I'll be fired, blacklisted. I'll never work in this industry again. Victoria stared at the folded paper as if it might explode. What is it? Proof, Marcus said simply. Proof of what's really happening here. Before she could respond, he was gone, melting back into the careful choreography of service. Victoria sat frozen, the paper seeming to burn against the white tablecloth. Around her, the restaurant continued its elegant performance. Conversations flowed like expensive wine silverware clinked against china, and Richard Blackmore continued his predatory circuit of the dining room. But everything had changed. The Golden Griffin was no longer a restaurant. It was a crime scene, and Victoria Sterling, disguised as Emma Walsh, was sitting at the center of a conspiracy that threatened to bring down not just one establishment, but potentially her entire empire. With trembling fingers, she reached for the paper. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if it contained the weight of everyone who'd been deceived within these walls. Victoria unfolded it carefully, keeping it low and hidden beneath the table's edge. It was a photograph printed on regular copy paper, but clear enough to make out the details. It showed the restaurant's loading dock taken from a high angle, probably a security camera. A truck was backed up to the dock, and 2 men were unloading boxes. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 days ago at 2:17 a.m., but it was the logo on the truck that made her blood run cold. Riverside Processing Plant. She knew that name from corporate briefings. Riverside had been shut down by the FDA 6 months ago for severe health violations. Contaminated meat, unsanitary conditions, bacterial infections that had sent dozens of people to the hospital. On the back of the photo, in Marcus's careful handwriting, were 3 words. This is Tuesday. Tuesday, 3 days ago. Riverside was supposedly closed, their facilities sealed, their products banned from human consumption. Yet here they were making deliveries to the Golden Griffin in the middle of the night. Victoria's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just fraud anymore, it was a public health crisis waiting to happen. Every person who'd eaten at this restaurant over the past 6 months had potentially been exposed to contaminated food. The liability alone could destroy Sterling Global, but more importantly, people could die. She forced herself to take another sip of wine to maintain the facade of Emma Walsh enjoying her meal. But inside, Victoria Sterling was already in crisis mode, calculating damage control scenarios and legal exposure. "Is everything all right?" She looked up to find Marcus standing beside her table, concern etched across his features. She must have looked as shaken as she felt. "The photo," she whispered. "How did you get it?" Marcus glanced around, then pulled out his phone. "My daughter works the overnight security desk at the building next door. She's been taking these pictures for months, trying to document what she's been seeing. We didn't know what to do with them." He showed her his phone screen, dozens of similar photos, all time-stamped in the early morning hours, all showing the same truck, the same illegal deliveries. "Why hasn't anyone reported this?" My daughter tried. Called the health department, the FDA, even the police. But Blackmore has connections everywhere. The reports got buried, and Lisa got written up for abandoning her post to take unauthorized photographs. Victoria felt the familiar burn of injustice in her chest. "What's your daughter's name?" "Lisa Chen. She's 24, just graduated from college with a degree in environmental science, taking night security work to pay off her student loans while she looks for something in her field. Another life being ground down by the system, another person trying to do the right thing and being punished for it. Marcus, I need you to trust me. Can you get me more information? Financial records, supplier lists, anything that shows the scope of this." He stared at her for a long moment. "Who are you really?" The question hung in the air between them. Victoria felt the weight of her disguise, the careful construction of Emma Walsh's identity. But Marcus had risked everything to show her the truth. He deserved honesty in return. "Someone who can actually do something about this," she said finally. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was enough. Marcus nodded slowly. "Blackmore keeps files in his office, safe. I've seen him opening it. The combination is his daughter's birthday, 0824, but getting access..." He shook his head. "The office is locked after hours, and there are security cameras everywhere." "What about during business hours?" "He's always in there, or one of his assistants. The only time it's empty is during the evening rush, when all hands are needed on the floor." Victoria glanced at her watch. 8:30 p.m. The dinner rush was in full swing, servers weaving between tables with practiced precision, managers solving small crises, everyone focused on the immediate demands of service. "Where's his office?" Marcus looked alarmed. "You can't be serious. If you get caught, I won't get caught." The confidence in her voice surprised them both. "But I need you to create a distraction, something that will keep everyone focused away from the back hallway." For a moment, Marcus just stared at her. Then slowly he nodded. "Give me 5 minutes." He walked away, and Victoria forced herself to finish her wine to maintain the appearance of a leisurely dinner. She watched Blackmore making his rounds, noting his position, calculating timing. Then it happened. A crash from the kitchen, loud enough to make half the dining room turn their heads. Shouting voices, the clatter of broken dishes. Every server, every manager, every available body rushed toward the sound, including Richard Blackmore, his face flushed with anger as he stormed toward the kitchen doors. Victoria stood up, leaving exact change on the table, enough to cover the meal and a modest tip that Emma Walsh would leave. She walked calmly toward the restroom, but when she reached the hallway, she turned left instead of right. Blackmore's office was exactly where Marcus had indicated, tucked behind the wine storage room. The door was heavy wood with a brass nameplate designed to project authority and permanence. Victoria pulled a bobby pin from her hair, a skill she'd learned during her brief rebellious phase in college, and went to work on the lock. Her father would have been horrified to know his daughter could pick locks, but some skills proved unexpectedly useful. The lock clicked open in less than 30 seconds. The office was a shrine to Blackmore's ego photos with politicians and celebrities' awards from restaurant associations, expensive art that had probably been written off as business expenses. But Victoria ignored the decor and went straight to the wall safe hidden behind a fake leather-bound complete works of Shakespeare. 0824. The combination worked on the first try. Inside the safe was exactly what she'd hoped to find. A second set of books meticulously kept showing the real costs and real suppliers. Page after page of evidence documenting not just the Riverside processing deliveries, but a network of fraud that stretched across multiple states. Victoria used her phone to photograph every page, working with the speed and efficiency that had made her father's business empire so successful. Purchase orders for condemned meat, invoices for wine that was actually prison liquor in premium bottles. Payoff schedules for health inspectors and city officials. But it was the final folder that made her hands shake. Inside were medical records, hospital admissions, emergency room visits, death certificates. Dozens of them, all from people who'd eaten at Golden Griffin locations across the country. All showing symptoms consistent with food poisoning, bacterial infections, contamination. People had died, and Blackmore had been tracking it all, documenting his victims like a serial killer keeping trophies. The sound of approaching voices snapped her back to the present. She quickly photographed the medical records, closed the safe, and slipped out of the office just as the commotion in the kitchen began to die down. She made it back to her table just as Marcus returned, his face carefully neutral. "Everything all right?" she asked quietly. A server tripped carrying a full tray. "Happens all the time." His eyes searched her face. "Did you find what you needed?" "More than I needed," Victoria said, her voice hollow with the weight of what she'd discovered. She stood up, gathering her worn purse and thrift store jacket. "Marcus, take your daughter and get out of here. Tonight. Don't come to work tomorrow, don't give notice, just disappear for a while." What are you going to do?" Victoria looked around the elegant dining room one last time at the unknowing customers, the complicit staff, the beautiful facade hiding such ugly truth. "I'm going to burn it all down," she said. Victoria's penthouse had been transformed into a war room by the time the sun rose. Arthur Whitman stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his usually perfect composure cracked like ice under pressure. On the mahogany conference table, 3 laptops displayed cascading streams of data. Financial records, medical reports, and legal documents that painted a picture of systematic corporate murder. "The scope is beyond anything we imagined." Arthur said, his British accent more pronounced when he was stressed. 17 restaurants across 8 states, all running the same operation. The contaminated meat, the fraudulent wine, the bribery network. It's not just Chicago, Victoria. It's everywhere. Victoria sat in her father's old leather chair, still wearing Emma Walsh's clothes. She hadn't slept, hadn't changed, hadn't allowed herself to process the full weight of what she'd uncovered. There would be time for that later. Right now, there was only action. How many people? 43 confirmed deaths directly linked to food poisoning from Golden Griffin locations. Another 200 hospitalizations. And those are just the cases where families pressed for investigations that couldn't be buried. The numbers hit her like physical blows. 43 people. Mothers, fathers, children. People who'd gone out for a special dinner and never made it home. Legal exposure. Astronomical. We're looking at wrongful death suits, federal food safety violations, conspiracy charges. If this goes public before we control the narrative... Arthur trailed off, but Victoria understood. Sterling Global wouldn't survive the scandal. What about criminal charges? The FBI is already involved. Agent Sarah Chen, she's been investigating a multi-state food fraud ring for 18 months. Your evidence is the missing piece she needed. Victoria looked up sharply. Chen any relation to Lisa Chen? Arthur consulted his tablet. Lisa Chen's aunt. Agent Chen started the investigation after her niece came to her with photos and complaints that were being ignored by local authorities. The pieces clicked into place. Lisa hadn't been ignored, she'd been heard by exactly the right person. She'd just been working through proper channels while her aunt gathered evidence for a federal case. Schedule a meeting with Agent Chen for this morning, and get our crisis management team here within the hour. We're going to need to coordinate with law enforcement on the timing of arrests and restaurant closures. Arthur hesitated. Victoria, there's something else. Richard Blackmore isn't just a rogue manager. He's been reporting directly to someone in our corporate structure. Someone who knew about the fraud and approved it. The betrayal cut deeper than the financial exposure. Who? We're still tracing the communications, but the approval codes in the fraudulent purchase orders. They trace back to Harrison Vance. Harrison Vance. Her father's old friend, a man who'd bounced Victoria on his knee when she was small, who'd given the eulogy at her father's funeral. The current head of operations for the entire hospitality division. Harrison's been with us for 20 years, Victoria said, her voice hollow. 20 years of positioning himself to profit from your father's death. The fraud started 6 months after the funeral, once he was sure you were too overwhelmed to pay attention to operational details. Victoria felt the familiar burn of guilt in her chest. She had been overwhelmed, too focused on learning the broad strokes of corporate leadership to notice the details where devils lived. Her inexperience, her focus on quarterly reports rather than daily operations, had created the perfect environment for predators to thrive. Where is Harrison now? His office, likely destroying evidence. But we've been monitoring his communications since last night. He knows something's wrong. Blackmore called him at 3 a.m. panicking about the disturbance at the restaurant. Victoria stood up, her decision crystallizing with the clarity that came in moments of true crisis. Have Agent Chen meet us at Harrison's office. I want to confront him personally. Victoria, that's not wise. Let the FBI handle taboo. No. Her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who'd finally found her footing. These people destroyed lives while hiding behind my father's name, my name. They turned his legacy into a murder weapon. I'm going to look Harrison Vance in the eye when he realizes his world is ending. 45 minutes later, Victoria Sterling walked through the executive floors of Sterling Global Industries. She'd changed out of Emma Walsh's costume and into her armor, a perfectly tailored black suit that announced her authority to everyone who saw her. But she'd kept Emma's worn purse, a reminder of what she'd learned about the world from the bottom looking up. Agent Sarah Chen was waiting outside Harrison's office, a small Asian woman whose quiet intensity reminded Victoria immediately of her niece. 2 other federal agents flanked the doorway, their presence turning the elegant hallway into a crime scene. Ms. Sterling, Agent Chen nodded respectfully. Thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. Thank you for listening when others wouldn't, Victoria replied. Is he inside? He's been on the phone for the past hour, presumably with lawyers. Are you certain you want to be present for the confrontation? Victoria thought of Marcus risking his job to show her the truth, of Lisa Chen documenting crimes while working night security to pay off student loans, of 43 people who died because she hadn't been paying attention to the right things. I'm certain. Agent Chen nodded and opened the door. Harrison Vance looked up from his desk, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror. He was a large man who'd grown soft in his middle age, his silver hair perfectly styled even in crisis. Behind him, the windows offered a spectacular view of the city, a view that would soon be replaced by prison bars. Victoria, thank God you're here. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Sit down, Harrison. Victoria's voice cut through his bluster like a blade. Agent Chen stepped forward, her badge visible. Harrison Vance, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, violation of federal food safety regulations, and conspiracy in the deaths of 43 individuals." As Agent Chen read him his rights, Harrison's eyes never left Victoria's face. "You don't understand. The profit margins, the shareholder expectations, your father would have made the same choices. My father would have shut it down the moment he learned people were dying," Victoria said quietly. "My father built this company on the idea that luxury should elevate people, not exploit them. Your father was naive." Harrison snarled, his facade finally cracking completely. "He never understood that business is war. You have to take every advantage, cut every corner, or your competitors will destroy you." Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "You're right about business being war, Harrison, and you just lost." As the federal agents led Harrison away in handcuffs, Victoria turned to Agent Chen. "What happens now?" "Now we execute simultaneous raids on all 17 locations. Every Golden Griffin restaurant will be closed pending investigation. We'll need your full cooperation in identifying other potential co-conspirators." Victoria nodded. "You'll have it. And Agent Chen, thank your niece for me. Her courage started all of this." Agent Chen smiled the first time her professional mask had slipped. "I will. Lisa's going to be proud to know her photographs helped bring down a conspiracy this big." 6 months later, Victoria Sterling stood in the empty dining room of what had once been the Golden Griffin Chicago. The tables and chairs were gone, the expensive art removed, the brass fixtures dark and cold. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows, and the silence was absolute. But it wasn't the silence of death, it was the silence of possibility, of "the structural inspection is complete," Arthur Whitman said, consulting his tablet as he joined her in the empty space. "The building is sound. The kitchen equipment, once properly cleaned and inspected, can be salvaged. The real question is what you want to do with it." Victoria walked to where table 32 had been, the tiny, wobbly table near the kitchen where Emma Walsh had learned the truth about her own empire. The Golden Griffin franchise was dead, 17 restaurants closed permanently, their assets liquidated to pay settlements to victims' families. But the buildings remained empty shells waiting for new purpose. "Any word from Marcus? He and his daughter are doing well. Lisa's been hired by the EPA. Her testimony in the federal case got attention from the right people. Marcus has been working with our transition team, helping identify staff members who weren't complicit in the fraud." Victoria nodded. Of the 847 people who'd worked for Golden Griffin locations, 312 had been completely unaware of the conspiracy. They'd been serving contaminated food and fraudulent wine while believing they worked for a legitimate fine dining establishment. She'd made sure every one of them received severance packages, job placement assistance, and counseling to deal with the trauma of learning they'd unknowingly been part of something so terrible. The settlements. Final payment went out yesterday. Every family affected has been compensated, though I know that doesn't bring back their loved ones. Victoria had insisted on hand-delivering several of the settlement checks, personally sitting in living rooms and kitchen tables across the country, looking into the eyes of people who'd lost everything because of her negligence. No amount of money could restore a lost parent, spouse, or child, but she'd made sure financial hardship wouldn't compound their grief. "What about the staff we're keeping?" Arthur smiled, a rare expression of genuine warmth from the usually reserved Brit. "They're excited, nervous but excited. The idea of worker-owned cooperatives is new to most of them, but once they understood they'd be partners rather than employees." The enthusiasm was infectious. That had been Victoria's decision to give the restaurant spaces to the staff who'd been harmed by the conspiracy, structured as cooperatives where servers, cooks, and support staff all owned shares in the business. They would serve honest food at fair prices with transparent operations and community oversight. It was the opposite of everything the Golden Griffin had represented. "Any regrets?" Arthur asked quietly. Victoria considered the question. The financial cost had been enormous, not just the settlements and legal fees, but the complete loss of the hospitality division, the stock price crash, the reputational damage that would take years to repair. Sterling Global had survived, but barely, and only because she'd acted swiftly to expose the conspiracy rather than trying to cover it up. Some board members had called her naive, just as Harrison had. They'd argued for damage control, for fighting the lawsuits, for preserving what could be preserved of the profitable fraud. Several had resigned when she'd refused. "No," she said finally. "No regrets." The sound of footsteps echoed in the empty dining room. Victoria turned to see a familiar figure approaching Marcus, no longer in a server's uniform but wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, looking younger, somehow lighter. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice carrying the same warmth she remembered from that night 6 months ago. "Not at all. How's the transition going?" Marcus gestured around the empty space. "The cooperative members are meeting tonight to finalize the menu and the name. We've decided to call it The Honest Table." Victoria smiled. "I like that. We want to do this right," Marcus continued. "We've been studying other worker-owned restaurants, learning about transparent supply chains, sustainable sourcing. Lisa, Agent Chen's niece, she's helping us develop environmental standards that go beyond what's legally required." "What about the other locations?" Similar stories across all of them. People who'd been serving bad food while believing they were part of something good, now getting the chance to build something genuinely good from the ground up. Arthur cleared his throat diplomatically. "Victoria, the car is waiting. The board meeting starts in an hour." Victoria nodded, then turned back to Marcus. "Will you send me photos when you reopen? I'd like to see what the Honest Table looks like when it's full of life again." "Actually," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I was hoping you might come to the grand opening next month. Not as Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global, but as Emma Walsh, the woman who sat at the worst table in the house and saw the truth the rest of us were too scared to face." He held out an envelope, her name written in careful script across the front. Inside was an invitation hand-lettered on simple cardstock. "The Honest Table cordially invites Emma Walsh to our grand opening, where every seat is the best seat in the house." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "I'll be there," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I wouldn't miss it." As she walked out of the empty restaurant for the last time, Victoria Sterling carried with her the weight of everything she'd learned about power, responsibility, and the price of looking away from uncomfortable truths. But she also carried Emma Walsh's invitation, a reminder that sometimes the most important changes happen when someone decides to see clearly, act bravely, and accept the cost of doing what's right. The Golden Griffin was dead, but from its ashes something honest was being born. And that, Victoria thought as she stepped into the Chicago afternoon, was worth any price she'd had to pay.